In a four-part series published in February 2021, the World Socialist website refuted the 80-year-old unchallenged myth that Sylvia Ageloff was an innocent dupe who was used by Ramon Mercader to gain access to Trotsky and carry out the assassination. The public persona that was invented by Ageloff and Mercader in the immediate aftermath of the assassination was later promoted by Joseph Hansen. The actual facts concealed by the pathetic myth of poor little Sylvia were never seriously investigated until recently. The narrative acquired a mythical status, but that myth had absolutely no basis in reality. The myth of poor little Sylvia was promoted by various sources. The 2016 film by Antonio Chavarrías, The Chosen, El Elegido, is one such example in which Ageloff is portrayed as a helpless, head over heels young woman by the actress Hannah Murray. And the same was true with the 1972 film, The Assassination of Trotsky by Joseph Losey, in which Ageloff was portrayed in similar vein by Romy Schneider. One of the earliest inventors of the myth of poor little Sylvia, aside from Mercader and Ageloff herself, was Joseph Hansen, who wrote in with his October 1940 article, With Trotsky Till the End, in the immediate aftermath of the assassination, quote, "For months, Mercader did not come near Coyoacan, but stayed in Mexico City. When Sylvia Ageloff, his wife, who was well known to the household, came to Mexico, he did not attempt to enter the house with her," end quote. Here, Hansen repeats two lies that were critical to the Ageloff myth, that she and Mercader were married, and that she never allowed him to enter the house with her. Decades later, in Healy's Big Lie, in a section titled The Case of Robert Sheldon Hart, Hansen again promoted the myth. He wrote, quote, "The odor of the old GPU slanders against Hart, we see, still persists in the headquarters of the Workers' Revolutionary Party. There is no thought there that Hart might have been victimized by Jackson, i.e. Mercader, the same way Sylvia Ageloff was victimized," end quote. So therefore, the myth of poor Sylvia became the basis for the defense of other agents, including Robert Sheldon Hart, who, as we know from the previous lectures, was referenced in the Venona papers as having definitively been an agent of the Stalinist secret police. Even after the publication of the four-part series by the World Socialist website, the pseudo-left has, in some cases, continued to attack security in the Fourth International, though over these last 4 years, they've been unable to factually address anything in the series on Ageloff. In June 2022, a June 23rd article that year by Nathaniel Flakin of the Morenoite English language publication Left Voice called security in the Fourth International a vile conspiracy theory which never came up with anything more than the most laughably circumstantial evidence. Flakin was and will obviously remain completely unable to challenge any of the actual evidence, circumstantial or direct, that was uncovered in security in the Fourth International. And it is his goal to present as laughable attempts to maintain the physical independence of the revolutionary movement from agents of the state. And it's the same basic method that led the Pabloites to defend Sylvia Franklin, even after the testimony of her having admitted to being a GPU agent was released to the public through the Gelfand case. They are not opposed to state infiltration of their movements because their movements are not politically opposed to capitalism and to the capitalist state. And it is notable in this vein that Flakin wrote his article attacking our laughable evidence of GPU penetration over a year after the Ageloff series was published, and he could not respond to any of the facts contained therein. Nobody could, and nobody has. In contrast to the middle-class radicals, here's how the International Committee explained security in the introduction to How the GPU Murdered Trotsky. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. We wrote, in referring to security in the Fourth International as an investigation, it must be grasped that this word only partially embraces the full political and historical content of the struggle waged by the International Committee during the last 6 years at that time. Like Trotsky's exposure of the Moscow trial frame-ups of 36 to 38, it is the highest conscious expression of the objective movement of the working class against the bourgeoisie and all its agencies. The exposure and political destruction of these agents, along with their accomplices in the revisionist organizations in every part of the world, is the supreme responsibility of the International Committee. The issue here is not vengeance for Trotsky's death. The essence of security in the Fourth International is the struggle for working class power. And it concludes, the finding of security in the Fourth International constitute an indispensable foundation for the training of Marxist cadre and a powerful material weapon of the world revolution. The agents which this weapon has already exposed and those whom it will ultimately destroy politically represent the spearhead of the counter-revolution. This fact must be grasped by every class-conscious worker and youth. All the historically accumulated instinct of the bourgeoisie for self-preservation finds its greatest level of consciousness in the elaboration of its strategy for destroying the revolutionary leadership of the working class. That's the end of the quote I want to read. The assassination of Trotsky on August 20th, 1940, he passed away in the next morning on the 21st, was the greatest political crime of the 20th century and the highest expression of the counter-revolutionary character of Stalinist reaction. In the months prior to the attack, Ramon Mercader, an agent of the GPU whose real name was not known until over a decade after the assassination itself, had ingratiated himself into Trotsky's compound where the leader of the Russian Revolution had been living in exile since January 1937. Mercader entered the compound, and then Trotsky's guards, including Joseph Hansen, allowed the assassin to meet with Trotsky in his office alone. And we know what happened next. Mercader's access to Trotsky in those critical days. I'm sorry, I need about 5 minutes. I'm sorry. Give me 1 second.
As many comrades know, Comrade Eric is involved in very critical cases involving immigration.
Okay, it was a different situation. I'm sorry about that.
I just want to explain for a moment that in case Eric is pulled away.
Mercader's access to Trotsky hinged on his relationship with Sylvia Ageloff.
Eric, can you hear David?
After the attack, Ageloff consistently presented herself as Mercader's unwitting dupe, a claim that was never directly challenged by the SWP. For decades, the broader Trotskyist movement and popular culture reinforced this image, failing to scrutinize the contradictions of Ageloff's story. Mercader, operating under the aliases of Jacques Monard and later Frank Jackson, entered Trotsky's fortified villa thanks to Ageloff's endorsement. The SWP, which as we know was principally responsible for Trotsky's security in its capacity as the US section of the Fourth International, did not conduct a substantive investigation into the GPU infiltration efforts or into Ageloff's actions. Sylvia Ageloff, however, was arrested by the Mexican police for her role in the events, was charged as an accomplice, and prosecuted. Her conviction was forestalled, as we now know, by outside intervention, while the SWP neither reported the ongoing investigation nor questioned the narrative that she presented. Sylvia Ageloff was raised in a prosperous, politically active family. She spoke multiple languages, including French and Russian. Ageloff's family background provided access to sophisticated networks in the United States and internationally. Her sister, Hilda, had traveled to the Soviet Union in 1931, securing an interview with Lenin's widow, a fact that would have required the approval of very high-level Stalinist officials and likely of Stalin himself. She published an article in 1931 detailing her experiences in the Soviet Union and praising Soviet education in an openly pro-Stalinist manner, showing no sympathy, for instance, with the persecuted left opposition, and praising the dismissal of Lunacharsky from the head of the Soviet education department. Ruth Ageloff, Sylvia's younger sister, became Trotsky's secretary in Mexico City on the recommendation of the leadership of the SWP. Ruth's later husband, John Poulos, was a prominent union activist who subsequently joined the Shachtmanite Workers' Party. His brother, named Konstantin Poulos, had close ties to the Greek Communist Party and worked for press agencies connected with British intelligence. Sylvia Ageloff herself was not only from a family with complex political ties, but she was a highly educated person, earning a master's in psychology at Columbia University in 1934. Her scholarly work focused on the theme of suggestibility, with particular attention to researching how authority figures influence perception and behavior, a fact which was at odds with the notion that she herself could have been so easily deceived by Mercader. Her dissertation, as you see, examined how children responded to figures they respected, and it concluded that individuals can often be led to abandon common sense under the influence of those that they respect. Ageloff was, by all accounts, analytical, observant, accustomed to critical evaluation, qualities which all contradict the legend of her as being a passive and gullible victim. And politically, Ageloff was an early and active participant in left-wing politics. She and her sisters had joined the American Workers' Party, which later merged into the Workers' Party of the US, and ultimately they entered the Socialist Workers' Party, within which she gravitated toward Martin Aborn. And I think it's interesting that Abornism has already come up in this Congress as a center of New York-based clique politics, before she eventually supported Shachtman in the 1939-40 faction fight with the petty bourgeois opposition. Ageloff would travel to Europe in 1938. She would later describe this trip, where she was to meet Mercader, as a vacation. But at the time, the stated purpose of her trip was to attend the secret founding Congress of the Fourth International, a Congress which was required to be secret because it was taking place in a period in which Trotskyists in Europe were being systematically hunted by the GPU. But despite this, she traveled with her friend Ruby Weil, who she knew was an active Stalinist and a GPU agent. She knew that she was an active Stalinist, and she also wasn't a GPU agent. Ageloff would later testify that she was well aware of Weil's Communist Party ties at the time she decided to take the trip. This alone, if there were no other fact in this case, would raise extraordinarily substantial concerns. Why, after all, would a trusted Trotskyist, traveling for the most sensitive political purpose during one of the most perilous periods for the movement, would associate so intimately with a known Stalinist on the way to the Congress? Correspondence and interviews from Ageloff confirm that she was well aware of the Weil sisters' political alignment and family connections, making the claim of ignorance increasingly untenable. When she met the man who called himself Jacques Monard in Paris, Ageloff developed a relationship with him, despite the fact that he openly claimed to be the son of a Belgian diplomat, was always flush with cash, and offered a background story that was riddled with a million inconsistencies. She never saw him work, nor ever read any of the articles which he claimed to write as a sports journalist. And with her advanced training in psychology and personal experience in politics, she evidently, according to the myth, chose to overlook these glaring red flags. It's worth pointing to the security environment surrounding the Trotskyist movement, especially in Europe in the late 1930s, as this school has already reviewed. The Soviet secret police had begun a mass campaign of political genocide and targeted assassinations abroad. Trusted Trotskyist members, particularly those who were gathering in Paris for the founding conference, were being hunted across the continent by GPU agents, some of whom, as we've already reviewed, gained access to their targets through personal relationships. We've discussed the case of Rudolf Clement. We've discussed Trotsky's European secretary, Rudolf Clement, had been murdered and his body mutilated and found in the Seine just weeks before the conference took place. Despite these well-known dangers, Ageloff associated closely with individuals later proven to be Stalinist agents, as we've said, including Ruby Weil. And she also introduced Mercader with his ever-shifting stories and shadowy financial backing to leading Trotskyists at the conference itself and in the environs while she was in Europe that summer. Now, after establishing a cover story of her meeting with Mercader, Ageloff's actions from this point on directly facilitated at every step his access to the Trotskyist movement and ultimately into Trotsky's household in Mexico. Mercader came to the United States in 1939 under a new alias, despite severe restrictions on immigration at that time. And although Ageloff achieved unprecedented, and through Ageloff, rapidly achieved an unprecedented level of intimacy with the American section. Interestingly, Mercader's immigration papers, and we now know that he was traveling under the passport of Tony Babich, a deceased loyalist fighter in the in the Spanish Civil War, the Communist parties in the Spanish Civil War. But he entered the United States as a result of a decision, according to his immigration papers, as a result of a decision to admit him based on executive order. The FBI was very interested in this, and I have never come across any other type of case, especially not one in this period of intense immigration restriction. The 1939, after all, was when the SS St. Louis had been turned away from American harbors. The idea that despite the fact that he was traveling on fake documents, the highest levels of the Immigration Service, by executive order, that is, by order of the White House, allowed him to enter the United States, I think does raise serious questions that merit even further investigation about the role of the US government in facilitating the assassination itself. Ageloff's French associates, including people like Marie Crépeau, grew increasingly suspicious of so many of the inconsistencies in Mercader's story. The generous payments she received from Ageloff received from Mercader for translation work and for ghostwriting, such jobs rarely existed or never existed at such high pay. And when she was questioned by her friends, Ageloff would falsely attempt to explain Mercader's behavior as that of an infatuated lover. Her subsequent invitation of Mercader to the conference is on its own a fact which defies any rational explanation. This individual was allowed to come to the conference that was held on one day, and that the leadership of the movement felt after the fact that it had to indicate happened in Switzerland for security reasons, defies any innocent explanation. Mercader then came to the United States on Ageloff's invitation. I mentioned in 1939. Now, just to review this again, the outbreak of the Second World War had created an incredibly intense security environment. The Roosevelt administration was not allowing anybody into the country, and nevertheless he's allowed in, where Ageloff introduces him into the social circles of the Socialist Workers' Party's New York branch. And friends of Ageloff, including people like Lillian Pollock, would later describe their own suspicions of Mercader based on his demeanor and his lack of any verifiable background. In early 1940, Ageloff arranged for time off from her job in New York City to travel to Mexico, where Mercader by then had moved himself. She became a frequent visitor at Trotsky's home in Coyoacan and leveraged the trust that her family and personal relationship had secured over time. Again, Ruth had worked for the household previously. Ageloff essentially took up the role of integrating him into the Trotsky household. Not only did she fail to alert Trotsky or his guards to the still unfolding inconsistencies in Mercader's identity and his actions, but she continued, according to herself, to support his presence in the household even after credible suspicions arose. Throughout 1940, there were several such warning signs. Ageloff would later recount to police that she had grown concerned, according to her own statements, about Mercader after discovering that his business address in the Ermita building did not exist. Instead of reporting this directly to Trotsky's security detail or withdrawing from the relationship altogether, she simply continued her involvement with him, failed to tell the household, and later claimed, and even when it later became known that the Ermita building was housed the office of David Alfaro Siqueiros. Now, in March, there's another strange incident. In March 1940, before she temporarily returned to New York, Ageloff Ageloff personally brought Mercader into Trotsky's home past the threshold for the first time, granting him an opportunity from within the walls to observe the villa's layout and to observe the routine of the guards. This may have proved very critical to the GPU's planning of the May 24 attack. Again, that is a matter of that merits further research. We've reviewed already the May 24th attack, and I'm not going to get into details there. But the attackers during this attack clearly had intimate knowledge of the compound's layout, and I think that it is clear that at least some of this information was gleaned through the insider access that Mercader had acquired shortly before. After the failed May assault, security around the Trotsky compound was theoretically strengthened, but as we've reviewed, the lessons from the attack, especially the critical need to vet those entering Trotsky's inner circle and responsible for his security, went unheeded. Meetings between SWP leaders in Mexico and Mercader continued to occur, even often enabled again by previous recommendations or introductions that Ageloff herself had made. And through this period, the chain of access always led back directly or indirectly to her. Now, after the May attack, the task of carrying out the assassination fell on Mercader. He was asked to travel back to New York, where he met Ageloff, stayed together at the Hotel Pierpont, and meetings were held with GPU handlers to discuss the plans for the assassination. One of the things that was conducted by Ageloff and Mercader and the GPU during their time in New York City in the middle of 1940 was the drafting of the letter that was found on Mercader's body after the assassination took place. But upon returning to Mexico, Mercader appeared to begin to buckle under the pressure of his new assignment. There are descriptions that Volkogonov makes decades later about how Mercader began to lose his nerve. He would disappear for several days. He would get exceptionally drunk. But at some point during the summer, the GPU was concerned enough about what was happening that Ageloff returned to Mexico. In July of August of 1940, and early August, the unusual behavior by Mercader even began to attract increasing attention within Trotsky's circle itself. And comrades have referred to the statements that Trotsky himself made and that Sedova would later make, saying that they simply hoped that once they learned Ageloff and Mercader were leaving soon, they were simply looking forward to their departure so that they wouldn't have to see the strange man again. But despite this, Ageloff once again intervened to try to allay suspicions and even lied to Sedova by claiming at that point that she was engaged to or married to Mercader. And this lie proved instrumental in persuading the household to continue to grant him access. During this period, though Trotsky expressed growing unease, he reportedly told associates that he feared that he would fall. I mean, he told people that he was aware that this would that he would fall victim to somebody who was coming, who had been given access to his house. And then we come to the event of August 17th, when Mercader made an unannounced visit to the Trotsky home, said he wanted to discuss the article that purportedly was inspired by a debate that he had with Ageloff about the faction fight within the SWP. And it was this encounter which involved Mercader sitting menacingly close to Trotsky with his coat draped across his arms, and seated on the desk, that only deepened Trotsky's suspicions. And it was after this that he said that he wished not to see Jackson again. On August 20th, the day of the assassination, in the morning of the 20th, Mercader and Ageloff began at the Hotel Montejo in Mexico City, which Comrade David has photographed on his trips as part of the security in the Fourth International investigation. Mercader reportedly left the hotel at about 9 a.m., came back at midday. Ageloff would later claim that he had explained his erratic behavior and tardiness as the result of long waits at the U.S. Embassy to arrange their return to the United States. According to what Ageloff later told police, she suggested that they go on a walk, during which they encountered Otto Schussler, who Comrade Dave mentioned earlier, one of Trotsky's longtime guards and aides, a man with substantial political experience in the workers' movement and especially on questions of security. They exchanged pleasantries, at which point Ageloff explained that she and Mercader planned to visit Trotsky that afternoon to say goodbye before supposedly leaving Mexico City because of what she claimed was Mercader's ill health. She said that the food didn't agree with him, which was another cover-up. And so Ageloff insisted on keeping Schussler out of the compound, having him meet her in the city itself for dinner. Coyoacan is located outside of the downtown city center area of Mexico City. Schussler tried to defer, said that he had to get back to the compound, but Ageloff pushed him, according to Schussler's later testimony. They were scheduled to meet at about 7:30 p.m., and Mercader, during this initial meeting at midday, continued to act nervously and eventually said that he had to leave abruptly the meeting with Schussler and Ageloff. That evening, they met at a restaurant downtown. Schussler and his wife arrived for dinner, but only Sylvia Ageloff appeared. She claimed that Mercader had urgent business that had come up last minute with somebody who she said was named Mr. Viñas. She provided a couple of addresses as she tried to allay Schussler's growing concerns about Mercader's about the fact that Mercader had not showed up for the dinner appointment. And in fact, Schussler would later testify that when he proposed that he call the compound to make sure that everything was okay, that Ageloff begged him not to do so. Now, upon hearing that the assassination had taken place, Ageloff immediately began feigning hysteria. It's interesting to note, again, the response of Sylvia Franklin, both during the depositions and also when Alex Mitchell and Comrade Dave were able to locate her in Wheaton. The similar methods of hysteria and ignorance were used. But Mexican police were unconvinced by her apparent distress. They arrested her immediately. Medical officials who inspected her and monitored her and took her blood pressure and kept her under close watch the whole time said that every time that Ageloff would have a hysterical fit, that her heart rate remained the same. And during interrogation, police began to notice that Ageloff's responses were inconsistent, that her bewilderment did not match with her level of intellect and her experience. They grew increasingly skeptical of her claims of innocence, with some openly declaring, including in statements to the media, that she was either guilty or, at the very minimum, played such a shockingly negligent role that there may be some criminal responsibility, even in the event that she was not herself found to be an accomplice. A key episode during these police proceedings, as we've noted already, was the confrontation of Ageloff and Mercader. Rather than aiding the authorities, that authorities, Mexican police brought them both into the room together for the first time. I think it was 2 or 3 days after their arrest. It may have been slightly less time. I can't remember exactly. During this time, one has to think about how a principled member of the movement would have behaved. Ageloff took no steps to try and confront him, Mercader, that is, with the information that she had gleaned through their long relationship. She did nothing of the sort. Rather than help the authorities get to the bottom of his role, and again, keep in mind, he had not admitted to being a GPU agent. He made no such admission at the time that he was in detention, and in fact, he would never make any such admission, and was praised roundly by his Stalinist attorneys and advocates for having stayed true, as they put it, to his comrades and not turning anybody in. But the reason I raise that here is that to have been able to have helped establish the GPU's role at that point would have been hugely significant, considering especially the fact that the GPU had gone to great lengths to create this totally unbelievable backstory that was conveyed in the letter that was found in Mercader's coat when he was subdued. She didn't confront him with any of the information she learned through their relationship. Instead, she demanded that he be killed. This was entirely consistent with the GPU's entire purpose in writing the letter, which was intended to be so provocative and to create such an angry response among the guards. The claim that he was a dissatisfied member of the Trotskyist movement who had come to bitterly hate Trotsky because he forbade his marriage to Sylvia Ageloff. But and Trotsky himself was well aware of the importance of keeping Mercader alive. But Sylvia Ageloff followed the GPU line at this point, screaming, "Kill him, kill him, kill him." Ran completely counter to the Trotskyist method for confronting crimes, not with retributionary violence, but with political exposure. By 1940, and again, this was not somebody who had lacked political experience. Her failure to take action at this time her failure to confront him cannot be credibly explained as innocence or emotional confusion. And then there is the fact as well that upon returning to the United States, she issued a public statement that was full of lies, claiming that she was not even a member of the Socialist Workers' Party, and asking to be left alone so that she could deal with her situation in private. Research by Mexican criminologist Martín Gabriel Barón Cruz has proven really vital to a better understanding of the response of Mexican authorities to the assassination. And the Security and the Fourth International investigation is really indebted to his work. He unfortunately passed away of COVID in 2020, just weeks before I contacted him. Unfortunately, was told this by his family. The Mexican authorities today still are extraordinarily proud of their work in undertaking this investigation, which is unquestionably the most important criminal investigation in the modern history of the country. The Mexican authorities at the time, under the government of President Cárdenas, approached the murder as a matter of principle for national sovereignty. They assigned, especially famously, the criminologist Alfonso Quiroz Cuarón to handle the inquiry. Their investigation was notable for its thoroughness and its impartiality amid intense international pressure from the Stalinist regime. From the start, as we've said, investigators were suspicious of Ageloff's narrative that she was merely an unwitting victim. The scrutiny of Ageloff's explanation for her behavior began when interviews showed significant inconsistencies in her account compared to the other witnesses and to Mercader herself. Central to the doubts that investigators began to have were the organization of the dinner with the Schussler family, and the fact that Ageloff had admitted that she had family in Russia, and that her acknowledgement of having witnessed at one point, apparently this came out in the examinations, Mercader communicating in some form of code and being extraordinarily secretive with his correspondence and belongings, something which she later claimed. Regardless, the authorities felt that even if she had witnessed that, her failure to report it at the time was further proof of her guilt. And then there was the question of the financial investigations, which revealed that she had received massive sums of money, over $3,000 at a time, which in 1940, which in today's money, I believe, comes to something like $50,000. She claims that she would deposit these in a New York bank. She couldn't remember the name of the bank, absurdly. And the Mexican authorities and the FBI agreed that this was related to that this was standard operating procedure for espionage, depositing espionage-related funds. This was something that came up actually in FBI agent Raymond Murphy's notes, which others have reviewed already today. The FBI was not fooled by her either. They conducted their own investigations, drawing similar conclusions to their Mexican counterparts. Agents from the FBI pressed Ageloff and her family to cooperate, and their conclusion was that she was withholding information that could help unravel the internal workings of the GPU's espionage apparatus in the United States, which was their concern. And then there's the famous memoranda which described Ageloff as being emotionally manipulative, implying that her fits of hysteria were calculated performances. In their view, she was a hard, secretive individual who might never divulge the extent of her involvement. And then former GPU operative Whittaker Chambers, in the W memorandum, told the SWP that he too, which was handed over by Hansen to the State Department, told the SWP that he too could not believe in the innocence of the Ageloff sisters. He said that only extreme innocence or willful blindness could explain her failure to recognize Mercader's espionage activities if she had been living and sleeping with him for 2 years. Chambers characterized also the fact that this was a very political, affluent family in New York City, and as something which was typical of the GPU's methods of infiltration. At the murder trial, as the murder trial began in Mexico City, the GPU and it's the murder trial of Mercader and of Ageloff. And again, I have to remind comrades that the name Mercader was not known at this time, as we've reviewed at the school. That was made known later by Gorkin as at least 1950. But the trial was of both of them, of both Mercader and Ageloff. And during the trial, there was an immense campaign of physical intimidation. Judge Raul Carranca Trujillo, who presided over the case, and prosecutor Francisco Cabeza de Vaca, both received death threats warning them against exposing the assassination's origins or in implicating the Soviet Union or the GPU in any way. Their determination to follow the evidence, regardless of of the threats to their own life, was actually instrumental in producing the most complete investigation of the crime by the Mexican authorities. And prosecutor Cabeza de Vaca's findings, which she explained, and we quoted in the article series, it's somewhat legalistic language, but outlined in definitive terms the factual basis on which the authorities were believed that she was guilty of murder, and that she was in fact charged with homicide. And a request to release her as the trial progressed was denied on security grounds. The press also widely reported Ageloff's incarceration. The bourgeois press, that is, the SWP's paper did not, the militant did not. There was, every day there were new developments in the case, new facts coming out. This was a major international story. And the Ageloff family used diplomatic channels, with her father directly appealing publicly to American authorities to pressure the Mexican government for her release. And there were also moves, moves in the background, as we were told. And I don't think this has been publicly stated before, but I was contacted by a relative of the Ageloff family after the article was published, who told me that in their family, it's understood that she was GPU, and that the release was secured because a large suitcase of cash was transported down to Mexico City. That was organized by the Ageloff family from New York, and that on that basis, the charges were ultimately dropped against her, and she was released. Now, there's much more that could be gone into here. I mentioned only in passing the statement that she made upon return, which was a statement which nobody who was ever a member of the Trotskyist movement would have ever given about an event of this level of importance. That she just wanted to go on living her life, etc. Then there's the fact that well, I'll get to that in a second, actually, but first I just want to address the fact that the prosecutor, Cabeza de Vaca, was himself assassinated in 1943, presumably by the same Stalinist network that he had attempted to expose. His grandson, who actually became Mexico's federal attorney general, publicly credited his grandfather's investigation with having revealed the true nature of the assassination conspiracy long before it became accepted fact. And as we know, Mercader was released ultimately from prison and honored by the Soviet and Cuban governments and the Castro family. Ageloff was able to live out her life in comfortable obscurity in New York, never seriously inconvenienced by her central role in the greatest political killing, or the most significant political assassination of the era. In 1950, Ageloff and her sister Hilda and Ruby Weil were summoned by the House Un-American Activities Committee, which was investigating the GPU's role in Trotsky's assassination in order to further the American government's own ends. The committee was interested in the broader GPU network, and in particular to the issue of atomic and military secrets. During her testimony, Ageloff downplayed her political connections, again characterized her European travel in 1938 as a vacation, and responded to questions in a manner that suggested a very calculated evaluation. Nevertheless, the committee, this was also after she had provided information behind closed doors. Nevertheless, HUAC offered a public statement thanking the sisters profusely for cooperating fully and providing valuable information, something which they had not done during the public testimony, suggesting that the off-the-record disclosures were much more important. The accumulated evidence from the Mexican and American archives, combined with all of the witness testimony from the trial itself, eviscerates once and for all the myth that Sylvia Ageloff was a naive, manipulated bystander. And again, in the 3 years since this series was published, nobody has presented a shred of evidence to contradict any of the information we presented. I'll conclude with the last words of the article series itself. Based on all the information that is now available, it is possible to replace the myth of poor little Sylvia with an accurate account of her role in the political catastrophe of August 20th, 1940. The real person finally takes the place of the constructed persona. Who was Sylvia Ageloff? The evidence leads overwhelmingly to the conclusion that she was an agent of the GPU who played a critical role in the assassination of Leon Trotsky. Thank you, comrades.